Welcome to the Land and Everything Else podcast. I'm Dr. Craig Lemoine, talking today with Brett Bovee from Westwater Research. Brett, I'm so happy to be talking with you. I have a ton to learn about water and what you do, and our audience as well. And we're meeting today with you at the Land Expo in our series of Land Expo interviews. So thank you so much for sitting down with us.
It's great to be here. I love the Land Expo event, and I love talking about water. So
that works out nicely. So, this is my first Land Expo, and it's been just such hospitality, and it's really been a lot of fun.
They know how to put on a good event.
They do.
For sure.
They do. Well, tell me a little bit about Westwater Research. What do you guys do?
Sure. Westwater Research is a consulting company based in the Western U.S., and we advise people on the economics of water, specifically water rights and water transactions. So in the water space, this is the niche we serve. Is we are experts specializing in the transaction of water rights as property. So this could be leases, this could be sales, this could be conservation projects, but we are geographically focused on the Western states where water rights are a legal instrument, and we pay attention to the transaction of those water rights, much like other groups pay attention to real estate property transferring.
Well, talk to me for a minute and help share with our audience today. Just give us a basic understanding of water rights, and
sure.
maybe on that understanding, kind of an issue on like, why is this important? Why is it maybe contentious, and how
sure.
can we learn from you?
Absolutely. So water rights, they are complicated by their nature, but to simplify it down, water rights are how each Western state has decided to allocate use of its water resources. So in any state, there are groundwater resources in aquifers, there are streams, there are rivers. And back in the time of late 1800s, during white settlement, there were instruments put in place to decide who gets to use those resources, because there was an understanding back in that time that there was not enough water resource, that everyone could just use what they wanted.
So even then, there was this understanding of, okay, we got to figure this out. Exactly.
Even then, there was a realization that this western part of our country was just so much drier than the eastern part. And so the system of water rights came about as just being the governmental tool and legal tool to decide who gets to use these water resources and how. And there's a very complicated set of limitations on your use of your water rights, but it is generally how states have decided to allocate the use of this shared resource among different users who all want to use the water. And these water rights exist, defining exactly how you can use water, where you can use it, and those water rights can be transferred to other people. And so that's kind of the space we work in, and why we have a service in the general world is these water rights do trade hands, and they trade hands much like other property changes hands. So just as people pay attention to land prices and real estate prices, there's a need to pay attention to the value of these water rights and the transfer activity that's happening around the Western U.S.
Is every state the same, or are states? Is there some commonality, or is it every state to themselves?
There's a lot of commonality in how water rights are managed in the Western states, but each state is unique. So there is no federal system of water rights. It is a state system, and so each state has put their own little flavor on how they manage water rights. That differs from other states. But commonalities are, most states have taken an approach that is similar to each other. Yeah.
Okay. So from the standpoint of water rights being somewhat commoditized, right, I would presume. I'm completely new to the space, but this is a fun conversation.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm going to run on in and use my economics brain a little bit. So to the standpoint that they might be commoditized then, right, at some point there was somebody that had a right to use water, right, on their land, property, whatever it is. And then I would assume they can trade it, transfer it, maybe sell it.
Yep. They can do the same things with the water right that you can generally do with land. So you can lease that, you can sell it, you can develop option contracts, pretty much the same transaction structures you see for land. Usually there's opportunities to do those same sort of types of transfers or transactions with water right holdings.
And I would imagine it's somewhat unique, right? From the standpoint that water can become very scarce and can suddenly become very plentiful.
Yeah.
Right? And in a matter of, 1 or 2 seasons,
yes,
you could have a drought, and maybe then you could be replenished.
Yeah. And we've seen a couple trends along those lines that you just raised. One is there's constant media headlines about water stresses in the Western U.S. Those are real. And so we are seeing kind of continued activity to deal with that imbalance. And one of the ways people are dealing with that imbalance is to reallocate water resources from one use to another, such as selling water from an agricultural use to a municipal use to support population growth, or leasing water from an industrial use to an environmental use because there's in-stream flow and habitat concerns for the environmental uses. So we're just seeing a reallocation of the resource from a use that it might have been in for a long time to a new use because of the general supply-demand imbalance that is in a lot of locations in the Western U.S.
Does the market set kind of water right exchange? Does policy set water right exchange? Is there some combination of all that?
It is mostly market set. And I say that as in these are usually voluntary agreements between people, so there's no regulation forcing people to transfer water or to enter into a water transaction. It's voluntary, it's compensated, it is a market transaction. And what we're seeing in the Western U.S. with these supply-demand imbalances is where you see more stress, where you see more imbalance, you're seeing more water trading activity. And with that, as you might expect as an economist, we're seeing price appreciation.
Sure.
So where there's stress, where there's more need to reallocate water resources, we are seeing demand for the good resources see a price appreciation.
And this is the investment question for you, but when we look at water rights, as if we can define that as an asset class, does it have distinguished traits different than land? Does it tend to follow appreciation of land and income use, or is it different in and of itself, kind of a unique asset class?
It can be a very unique asset class from land. And I would say geographically, there's two answers to your question. What I see in the western states of the U.S. is that in areas that are rural and where in those rural economies, it's largely an agricultural economy or basis for the economy, water values tend to track with agricultural land values. Like, the water is most likely to be used in agricultural use.
So then it all plays together.
And then the flip side of that, the other answer to your question is there are places in the Western U.S. that economies are much more diverse and sophisticated than rural agricultural economies, and you see water as an asset class that has very different economics than agriculture in that area.
Oh, I mean, I can only imagine. When you have a very developed infrastructure, you have industrial production and ag, and then you've got to weight those three, the market would come in and do that weighting.
Yes. And we see, I gave a presentation this morning where it's not uncommon to see water values that are priced at levels that are 8 to 10 times as high as agricultural values when those other demands are there and driving those prices up.
So you could have water where there's no utilization, there's really no cities. The only option would be ag use, would be cheaper, those rights perhaps, than one where it's, okay, we can use it in one of 4 or 5 ways.
Right.
So then demand would drive price.
Demand in water, for most places, demand is driving price.
No question.
For sure.
So now walk me through. Thank you for that background. That was extraordinarily useful.
Yeah.
So kind of walk me through. All right. So I believe that water rights are valuable. They're something that. How could I include that in my portfolio?
Yeah, it's a good question. So focused on land investment and like farmland as an alternative investment, we work a lot with institutional investors, people looking at farmland, and really there's two sides to water. There's the risk and the opportunity.
Okay.
And I'll talk about each a little bit.
Sure, please.
So on the risk side, I was talking about supply-demand imbalances in the Western U.S. kind of as a general statement. There are regulatory and market responses to that supply-demand imbalance. And on the risk side, what you really want to look out for is the regulatory side of that. So what we're seeing in a lot of Western places where water is critical to farmland, to crop production, so that's not everywhere, but it's a lot of places in the West where you need to be irrigating to make the returns that your investment was based upon. So where irrigation is critical, there are regulatory changes taking place that you need to pay attention to and be aware of. So a lot of groundwater regulation is happening in California, Texas, Colorado, Nevada, Idaho. Most Western states, there's new and more restrictive groundwater use regulation going on because we've historically overtapped those aquifers. So if you've got a farmland property that you're looking at and you're not paying attention to what does the future look like for my water supply for irrigation, it might be different than what you think it is, or different than what it's historically been. The same goes for surface water flows. So snowpacks are less than they used to be in a lot of places. Stream flows that are created from that snowpack are less than they used to be. This is generally climate change, coming into play. And what we see with that is you can't just look at the historical record. You've got to pay attention to what does the future look like from a water supply standpoint? What are the risks I'm seeing? And then the other obvious risk from a water rights standpoint is just to do your diligence on the water rights. Make sure the seller is selling what they say they're selling on legal ownership of what rights or what contracts are supporting farming. So that's sort of the risk side of water in farmland investment. That's very common for buyers to be paying attention to. I'll talk about the
opportunities.
Yeah, so opportunities side is the other side of it, which is, again, the supply-demand imbalance creates risks, but it also means the water assets tied to farmland could be more valuable than the farmland either presently or in some number of years. And it has to do with where the farms are located, what are the growth projections and sort of land uses and home building activity, for one, that is going on in those areas, and what is the expectation about the underlying water assets that are supporting farming currently on that property. What is their likelihood that they could be segregated off the property and have a buyer in the future for a non-farming use? So it's sort of a long-term investment question of, are these water assets actually going to become more valuable than the farm ground someday? The other thing I'll say about opportunities is maybe even more so than the sale of water off the property, we're seeing more and more interest in leasing water from agricultural lands on a temporary basis.
Okay. How would that work?
Sure. So it has to do with farm management. So you might work a water lease into a crop rotation where you're rotating every third year, and in that third year, you're temporarily idling in the ground and leasing the water out, but you're coming back into production. Or you agree that I'm going to turn the farm ground into organics, so I'm going to take a 5-year hiatus, plant a cover crop, but I'm not going to use the water assets, and I can lease those water assets.
But I still want to retain them for when either I sell the property down the road or... Right, and then I can derive income.
Absolutely.
From leasing the water rights.
And the other thing about temporary sort of water management on farm property is we're seeing more and more interest in payments for conservation's sake. So these would be state and federal dollars that are paying farmers to use less water, not because it's being leased to another party, but just because we're overusing the system or the supply available. So there's payments in the Colorado River Basin, in Idaho, in many places we work, where these conservation payments are available to just use less water, even if you're still farming.
Interesting.
And so that's another opportunity that's specific to water. It's another revenue stream to be looking at.
So conservation payments using less, or leasing, and then having an income stream off the lease for a period of time.
Exactly.
And doing something else with the land in the period of time I'm leasing. Absolutely.
So leasing makes up about 70 to 80% of the Western water market in terms of volume.
Sure.
So a lot of our Western water market activity are leases, 1, 5, 10-year contracts to move water and reallocate it, like I was talking about. Sales are very important, but there's just a lot of activity around water leasing. And I see that continuing to be the case.
So then I guess just to share a little more about what you do now that we've had this conversation,
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So walk me through. So we've talked about water rights, and we've talked about leasing, and we've talked about, West states and the slight regulatory risk that goes along with all this.
Yeah.
So then what is it Westwater does to that end?
Yeah. Happy to talk about what we do. Yeah. Westwater, we're an economic consulting group, and we really have 4 main services we provide. So we provide valuation services. So when somebody's looking for the fair market value of water entitlements or water assets specifically we will do an appraisal and provide our opinion of fair market value.
Okay.
We maintain a data set on water transactions throughout the Western states to help inform that valuation practice. So we have good data. It's sort of like Zillow for water. It's not as robust as Zillow. I mean,
right. But it gives you more data than, it gives you a nice data source of this is a fair price, right?
Because
what is a fair price, right? And then I think that helps determine that.
That's right. Because comparable sales are so important for any appraisal work.
Of course.
We like to have our hands on comparable sales as quickly as possible.
Right.
Second service we provide is transactional. So we will actually help people buy, sell, lease, trade water entitlements, and we sort of provide an advisory role there.
Sure.
Third service we provide is economic study. It's sort of a catch-all, but you could think of what are the benefits of a new capital water project. The engineers will design it, they'll cost it, but they need to show that the benefits will outweigh the costs for public funding. We'll do the benefits side for that. Or we might provide an overview of market activity in a specific geographic area to help people inform planning decisions about what they're going to do next. And then the fourth and final area of service is really around diligence. So when I talked about risks around properties, that's a regular service we provide, is helping provide people with that sort of risk opportunity analysis specifically to farmland investments.
And I guess I can't but think a lot of what we talk about on this podcast is, we always want to build a team to support our client or our customer, right? To make good decisions and to make wise decisions. And I think this reinforces the need for that diligent team.
Yep.
And I think brings into play, if we live in a place where water is perhaps more scarce than other places, let's make sure that we do discuss water rights in any sort of purchase or conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is absolutely true that a good team, when looking at farmland investments, is critical to make simply an informed decision. So your team is there to help provide the information so that that informed decision can be made. And the teams I work with often include us on the water side, an attorney, maybe someone looking at the agronomics and the soil health. But members like that of your team are critical, I would say.
I've learned so much today, Brett. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.